Hello and welcome to Fire in the Belly. Today we have myself, Mighty Pete, and we're joined by the Heather Lundy again. So putting me in the hot seat. So good morning, Heather.
Good morning, Pete. How are you doing today?
Doing awesome, awesome. So tell us, what are we here to talk about today?
We're here to talk about agenda.
Okay.
Specifically, the concept of having no agenda or the intention to talk without or to listen without an agenda.
Okay. Is it possible to have nothing? It's possibly the first question. You know, nature abhors a vacuum, so it's impossible to have nothing. There's always something. You know, even a pause has a purpose. You know, a space has a purpose. A gap or not having an agenda has an agenda itself to not have an agenda. So you can go in that merry circle for quite some time before you realize that not having an agenda is an agenda. You know, it's a bit like not making a decision is a decision. You've decided not to decide, whether you do that consciously or unconsciously. But the principle behind not having an agenda is that you are, in my opinion, trying to reserve judgment. You are trying to withhold, you're trying to take on board inputs from outside, whether that be visual, auditory, through the other senses, or take on information from somewhere else, but without sort of putting it straight into a decision tree or a judgment process. So ideally you sort of take it on board, that actually you let it flow. So one of the processes I do with the interviews is literally to start off with a blank A3 sheet, and it is blank apart from the person's name at the start. And I let them know that, so that they know, one, that I'm sort of scribbling down while we talk, for two reasons. One, that keeps my brain occupied on something. So no different to if an artist was painting a subject, they would have a blank canvas in front of them. So they look at the subject and then they look at the canvas, and they're trying to basically take on board what they're seeing and, translating that through their brain and then posting it back onto the canvas. And your job is to try and create as like a copy as possible. So same with having no agenda, is that rather than necessarily, you're trying to make sure that you have the clearest, most open picture, that you allow the conversation to flow, you allow the person to go where they go, being that quite often if something is on our mind, ultimately if you give the space and the blank canvas, they will take themselves there, which is powerful in itself.
So how do you set that out with people? Talk me through your process and your aim.
The process, so by defining it as a safe space, defining it that everyone is different. A planet full of me's would be a very weird place. Planet me with lots of me's is, you're going to have lemmings, you're going to have all sorts going on. So it's just saying to them, listen, we're all perfectly imperfect. Your story is your story, and there's neither right nor wrong. So it's trying to more or less say that, listen, I'm not here to judge. I'm not here to, this is not a pass or fail situation. This is an open forum. Yes, the objective or intention is for it to be made into a podcast, but actually it's not the first. It's not the first goal. The first goal is to have a powerful conversation, let's say. And even conversation, the word conversation is probably a bit misleading. I mean, I quite often I'll call it, I don't call it an interview, I'll call it a chat, because people will come for a chat, they will turn up for an interview. And that's, so do you want to come on for a chat? Yeah, I'll come on for a chat. Would you like to be interviewed? Ooh, okay. It's just a deep,
it's a different thing.
It's a different focus. So saying to people, yep, bring a cup of coffee, glass of water, get comfortable, sit down, have a chat. There's no rights, there's no wrongs. Even asking them not to prepare in advance and saying you spent your life preparing, so this is just the right moment in time. So the more they prepare, the more the conscious brain has kicked in terms of going, I want to say this, I want to say that, I want to say the next thing. I'll have post-it notes, I'll have a list of statements I want to say, I'll have all this. So by clearing the decks and just saying there's no rights or wrongs here, I'm starting with a blank agenda, I'm not hitting you with 50 questions, we go where we go. You know, if the intention obviously is to record a podcast, but I know the conversation will be of service. Now that conversation may just be that it's of service to myself and the guest, and actually it does something for the guest, but actually it never goes to air. Well, that's okay too.
Okay.
So and that sits in what I would call our spoil rate. So no different, and it would have the traits of counseling, but it's definitely not counseling in that we are not looking at blame. We are not looking at negative. We are not, we look at the past, but also more in terms of a reflection in terms of how it's tied to the future. So that's the journey. And there's no judgment on whether it being good or bad. It's just they were the milestones that happened on the way. By nature of unpacking it and sort of retracing that path and journey that they come to today, because they're seeing it from a bird's eye view, they get a different perspective on it. And as we often do when we look back and we take time to reflect, well, that reflecting again, suddenly you see patterns. You might see 7-year cycles. You may see certain things that I've always dated a certain person, or I've tried doing this job several times, or we see patterns.
Yeah.
If you, as the other part of the conversation, have an agenda, you're going to miss a lot of that because you're trying to format the conversation into your structure, and the picture in your head and the picture in their head is always going to be different. And if you go in with an agenda, then you cannot keep a blank canvas to try and I say try because you never will be able to recreate the masterpiece and the journey in their head. So you can only ever listen, because you cannot give, you can sort of reflect of where maybe you went and lessons you had. But the problem is you don't know all the factors, all the experiences, journeys, highs, lows, meanings, beliefs, etc. that's gone on in their life. So all you can do is just try and get as close, in recreating their masterpiece on your blank canvas, if you like. And just enough that you can have a conversation, or you can just ask them to, never be responding or, should always be, can you clarify what is this? I've noticed this. Can you explain what that means? Something like that, which is basically trying to clarify and sort of focus the picture.
So yeah, that's seeking understanding.
Yes. Yeah. So if the words I think, you should, have you, a lot of those are typically going to be opinion based. Have you tried speaking this? Have you tried to meditate faster? Have you tried, whatever it is? So they can be useful steps, but the problem is straight away before you've even received the full download of the picture or of the goal of their masterpiece and all these sort of senses and everything else that's around it, you have jumped in and you've started to actually, it's a bit like jumping in and sort of, if someone's trying to get their portrait taken and they're sitting as a subject on a marble column and they're looking pretty, and the artist has asked them to sit for 6 hours or 2 days or whatever it is, and then somebody's jumping around in the background, you kind of go, that's not helpful.
Yeah.
That's not allowing me to see a clear picture because there's distractions, there's other things. So no different when you're having a conversation, is you want to sort of block out everything, see the subject, see the picture as clearly as you possibly can, and be of service. And then that will be the most like reflection. And also in that reflection is going how that's potentially made them feel, and also you as the artist. So saying, when you said that, I'm really sort of, that made me feel uneasy, and I'm trusting that an inner sense has picked up through your language, tone, or something else that maybe I haven't understood consciously, but subconsciously I'm suddenly feeling anxious, or I'm suddenly feeling that this, that, I think, to reflect on a feeling and going, I'm feeling a bit anxious here. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That can make sense, but he's kind of going, that sounds like it was a really bad thing that happened there, Heather. How is that for you? Well, you've just suddenly prejudged it. You have suddenly, I'm trying to put my opinion onto you that it was a bad thing. Whereas actually at the moment of clarity, potentially on a bird's eye view, potentially in a neutral space and not having an agenda means that actually it is what it is. And not only that, you can choose to check, as in, checkmate, but you can check their language, you can check their tone, and say, well, actually, whilst it was a positive experience, I'm getting some negative language or negative tones. Can you explain that? And trying to keep it as, we're not, if you're working with someone and your goal is to say by the end of the session, I want them to come away with 54 action plans, and I want to have everyone to have a sort of a moment of enlightenment on every occasion. Well, that's an agenda. You're now forcing it to go on. If they haven't sort of broke down crying or something hasn't happened, then I've not done my job. Well, there you go. That's an agenda. So, success means tears, or success means bouncing out the door and suddenly going, that's the best session ever. And not only that, you're saying, why am I seeking this recognition? Why am I seeking this? That means I have an agenda of feeling good by working with this person. So that helps.
And that's most definitely not what you have. It's just a blank canvas. What about?
It's trying to. I think it's nigh on impossible. Because even when you're speaking to someone, you might be going, gosh, I'm quite thirsty. Or, my left foot is really tingling and they're talking to me. There's always, that's life. There's always an agenda. It's kind of going, right, I need to finish at this time, or I need to do, there's always something. I think the best you can do is provide the sort of the quietest environment you possibly can. It's never going to be sound free, distraction free, anything else. Because even as we speak, you might go, well, the internet's doing something, and then there's something flashing over here, and a car's just gone by. So it's never, you just, as much as you possibly can, and whether it's anyone that knows, whether it's meditation or in a deep conversation, suddenly the brain just starts to hear the noise, and then it starts to do noise cancelling, and then suddenly you just focus right in. Mm-hmm. But that only happens through connection, through a sort of a willingness to listen, and a quietness and focus and concentration. That can't happen while somebody's on the phone and someone's yelling here, and there's cups of coffee here, and there's varying noises and stuff. So I think it's impossible to have no agenda. I think the best you can do is to provide the most safe, welcoming, warm, non-judgmental space that people can feel that they can, they are free to be open and honest in. I think that's the closest you can get to no agenda.
Okay. What about for the guests in terms of agenda? I noticed that not always. Obviously you have a series, and on the Fire in the Belly show there are a range of podcasts or podcast types, but predominantly there might be life story talks, or they could be boardroom talks. So what about for the guests? Would you how is that clarified for them, that issue of agenda, potential issue of agenda?
Yes, so there is a structure, but I think that structure is quite beneficial. So the first thing is people going 2 hours. It's a long time. Well, we've 12 sets of 2 hours every day, so it's not that long. It's not that long a period. If you're watching Netflix or something else, you'll do it quite casually every evening, or whatever your chosen program is. We'll binge watch a series for God knows how long. Yeah. But I think it's a giving an elongated period of time. It's for the guest is understanding that actually, so we'll premeditate it again in the instructions. So we'll say this is going to be deeper or longer than most. So straight away we've said it slightly different. It's about their journey, and in the sort of pre-interview text and narrative. So there'll be that saying it's it's about their lessons, their journeys, their insights, and their vision and their goals. So it's very much a sitting, it's a bird's eye view, just hovering, so they can look back just to the journey they've come upon, where they can step back from their own current position and actually reflect on where they are at this time. And so you have to step out of that space to be able to do that, because otherwise you can't sort of go, well, how are you today? And it's like, oh, I'm fine. What's your point?
Yeah.
Whereas you can go, just step back a second, where how where are you at in your life today? Well, actually, we're okay. I'm in a good place, and this is going on. And okay, yeah. Well, funny enough, because you've told them to disassociate from themselves, to reflect on their, where are they at compared to somewhere else. So comparison is a useful tool as well. Compared to a year ago, compared to when you were 7, compared to, when you were, I don't know, last in, working for this company, or, so that allows them to actually, have a comparison. So suddenly that's useful. So, what's your car like today that compared to the car you drove 10 years ago? And you kind of go, well, straight away the brain has to go into function and say, right, well, right, take me back quickly to 10 years ago. What was it? Oh, I was driving this, and what am I doing? Oh yeah, well, in fairness, yeah, I can see. So that comparison also helps to give, um, you know, be relatable. So suddenly that, having a scale to put it against, but it has to be your scale. Because if I compare my car 10 years ago to your car today, it's a absolutely, well, in many ways, a pointless exercise,
Mm-hmm.
and it's never going to end that well, because there's so many variables, and it's comparing cheese and fish. It's like, what is the comparison? I like cheese and I like fish, but don't put them together, and you know that it's just not meant to be. So that's same with everyone. Passing on opinion, going in with an agenda, going back to that, is if you go in with someone with your comparisons, your expectations, etc., it's completely irrelevant to them. In fact, it's disruptive. So when somebody is in the middle of a chat, it's like suddenly screaming, shouting out like strawberry cheesecake. You go, pardon? It's, and in the world of NLP or whatever, they call it like it'll be a pattern break, or a state break. So again, if I suddenly say, Heather, can you smell fish? What? What are you talking about? Fish? No, I can't. Okay. What was I talking? So straight away you've lost your flow. So allowing them to get into flow, that's the other thing, is the more, if you have no agenda and the mission is going, I need to hold this space, and they will go where they go. And this is why people sort of say to me is like, I've told you stuff and I've never said this to anyone before. And I look back and I'm kind of going, I'm not necessarily asking that deep a question. But what I am doing is I'm pausing long enough to let them, whether it's uncomfortableness or whatever, because we are generally, as humans, we're very uncomfortable with the pause. It's like, just someone
Speak.
has to
Yeah.
speak, or else. And people talk about going in, anxiety suddenly shoots through the roof, and suddenly they've verbal diarrhea, and they're going to go, I need to shut up now. I really need to stop
Yeah.
talking. And so, but going in and saying to the person, like, listen, this is your space. You choose to do what you do. So whilst the questions may not be that deep or directing, people have allowed themselves to go there. Maybe it's because they haven't had that chance before. Maybe it's just the flow in the conversation. There's any one of those, but I think keeping in state, doing it for a prolonged period of time, um, without judgment. I'm not sitting here going, yeah, you did that before to me and that wasn't nice. I'm sitting here going, I don't really know you. I don't really want to have preformed opinions. In fact, the more you know them, the less you should speak, in my opinion, because it's exactly that. You're looking at their past behaviors, their past successes, their past failures, if that's what you want to choose, and you can't help but then put that against your scale. And then maybe you thought at the time and going, well, you failed here because you didn't do X, Y, and Z.
Mm.
You were a good person because you did this, that, and the other. And you kind of go, well, you know nothing about. That's you applying your grade and scale, against somebody else's. It's, I don't know, it's a bit like me putting my blood pressure and heart monitor rate and comparing it against you as a person. And kind of going, what's the connection? There is no connection, and that's the thing. So how can you go in and have a conversation if you're going in, and a conversation where they have the talking spoon?
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going in with opinion, how can it be, how can that happen with them holding the spoon?
And how is that different for you whenever it's somebody that you know? You were saying there that you'd nearly be quieter. How do you navigate that? I think that's quite interesting to be able to do that.
Uh, It's like skiing. I don't think you necessarily would be quieter. I think you have to force yourself.
Okay.
If you were a parent or a guardian or something else, or someone comes in, because that you know them that much better, you bypass all the detail and you shoot straight to solution mode. You do a man thing. It's the,
Yeah.
men will provide solutions, and you give us a problem. I know you just want to talk about it, but I'm going to bring you back. I'm going to go down and club something to death and drag it back here, and that's your solution. And just kind of go, I just wanted to talk about it. you know and that's, men and women,
Let
if
me
you want,
talk.
if
Yeah.
it's like, well, okay, so, and I get upset because I went out and clubbed four things to death and dragged them home, and that's actually not what you wanted at all. It's like going, okay, I can't win here, I've tried everything. So when you know someone too well, it's not that you necessarily don't want to, but the hardest thing is to sit and just give them space, because you have prejudgments, you have ulterior motives, there's every possible value, emotion, belief, experience, negative behaviors, good memories, bad things, everything is in there. So, and that's why, sometimes it's can be great having that deep connection. But the
Mm-hmm.
question is, how do they make you feel too? Because some people make you feel great and you kind of go, and I could talk to you all day.
Mm.
Some people go, do you know what? I just constantly feel judged. Not can be quite common with parents, unfortunately. Just going, I couldn't tell my mother or my father that, because they know they will be judged, or I couldn't say that to somebody else because they know it will have consequences. And it's like, how can you have an open conversation when there's sort of a consequential axe hanging, waiting for you to trip over the right wire that will come down and, chop your beliefs or chop your dreams and goals in half, because they're not gonna let it go. They're not going to be able to just sit back and go, this is a safe space. This is, guilt free. Come in and it's almost like having a, what do they call it? It's a intervention.
Yeah.
Going, it's super hard. It's going to be emotional. It's going to be a lot of things, because suddenly you have to bite your tongue and you go, okay. But even sitting there, it's like, if you're bursting to say something and someone is talking and your job is to say nothing, you can't wait for them to just give you the chance to go, I'm going to give them both barrels when they shut up.
That's not your job on the show.
No. So,
Definitely not.
it is that. It's no judgment, clear space. Even just saying to people, listen, if you get to the end of the show and it's not going to serve, it's not going to bring you value, it's not going to be something you're going to be, I'm not saying necessarily proud of, because quite often it's being so raw, it's kind of going, okay, it's raw, I'm
Mm-hmm.
happy to let it go, but I'm not running away from it either. It's just, it is what it is. It's a beautiful sort of moment in time. It's a line in the sand, and it's just a very honest and raw reflection. And quite often people say, listen, that's just who I am, you know?
Yeah. It's an interesting thing to be able to say that's just who I am. If I'm thinking of my experience with interviews or being interviewed, um, generally there's a very set and established agenda. There's sound bites have been created. It is for a definite purpose, and the conversation normally goes accordingly. So it's a hugely different experience for people.
It is. I did an interview yesterday, 2.5 hours of pure rambling, total and utter pure rambling. And I don't mean that negatively.
No, I
Like,
don't think you do.
it was just one of those things that going, this is like, just sitting back with a bag of popcorn going, I'm quite curious what they're going to say next, because we are so far off topic. We're in just a different, we're finding out that I don't want to give away the interview because, it's one of those things where I'll probably, that interview will probably be, I know it's going to be part of a multi-part series, but almost that's the bit they had to get off their chest first. And that's quite common, is when there's a lot of pent up things, it's very easy someone will blurt out something. It's the old age old, straw that breaks the camel's back.
Mm.
You know, um, it could be something crazy where you've been festering. And that's the thing, because people fester at different speeds too.
What a
I'm
word, festering.
Yes. Well, I remember something from 3 weeks ago, and and I can just feel it's working away there. And you're comparing everything to that, and it's very easy to jump in and going, that person didn't say good morning to me. Mm-hmm. And they looked at me funny, right? Okay. So suddenly you wrap a whole load of judgments, and then you compare ongoing events to it until you actually either get the chance to sort of say, listen, last week you said something, or else, if you suddenly connect in other, connect a square to a packet of crisps to the elephant to something else, and then suddenly you come up with an answer of 412, and then you just suddenly blow up, and you kind of go on, what? The problem is that the connection is so tenuous, but yet in your mind it's just been left that the sort of this seed, this sort of something that hasn't sat right with your values, or a disconnection, and then suddenly you're kind of going, because you haven't had a chance to vent, and then you've had a chance to stack in and compound other stuff. They looked at me funny, and then they didn't do this, and that didn't happen, and then suddenly this story has evolved, because you're sitting there and going, I'm judging, and then they didn't do this, and that's my opinion, and I'll throw a bit of doubt in on top, and a bit of fear and anxiety, and then well, screw them anyway. Just kind of go, they just didn't see, or they didn't know, or whatever. How often do things get carried away, out of just an oversight, and yet we apply our agenda, our set of rules, our set of beliefs in life to their oversight. I was too busy. I was distracted. My leg had fallen off, so I wasn't really focusing on what was going on. You know, the old adage of we never know what's going on behind closed doors. Somebody could be smiling on the outside and absolutely in bits on the inside, or vice versa. So applying your agenda at any point in time to somebody else's behavior, it's something we do all the time. Opinions, judgments, we can't help ourselves, but yet it is a completely irrelevant, unuseful scale to apply it to. And that's getting to the point of the more neutral and sort of non-binary, non-judgmental, just the most open and blank space you can provide, then it is what it is. And watch out for the tripwire. People go, what do you think?
We asked that on the show.
Regularly.
Take me there.
Well, when we have we voluntarily blurt out something, and again, it's maybe and you got to be aware of this too, because it may be a version that they, especially on the show, they may be there to not impress, but they're certainly wanting to put their best foot forward, and that's fair. I mean, that's absolutely,
Yes. They're
standard
aware it's
inspirational.
public. Yeah.
So there might be a little bit evasive about certain things, or maybe the problem is you don't have the full facts. Now you can potentially say, well, okay, what do I think? There's certain things I've noticed in your language here, or whatever. So suddenly you're kind of again, you're applying opportunities, things like that in front of them, which is so hard from any coaching point of view or mentoring or whatever, because again, you're sort of taking their expectations, dropping it into your set of rules, all the training, all the things that have happened into your life, and then you've run it through your formula and said, I think you should do this. But the problem is that has not been replicated on their side. You've suddenly run it through your machine and saying, I think you should own a parrot. And they go, okay. And I can convey that why owning a parrot would be a very cool thing to do, because I've heard your language. So saying, so you want something that will be submissive and will talk to you, and brings regularity and is colorful in the corner and is a nice piece of furniture and it's a pet and all the rest. And you're kind of going, yeah, actually, do you know what? That's a lot. But you're kind of going, I'm going out to buy a parrot. I'm not entirely sure why. So that's why you got to be a little bit mindful, is kind of going, is this my story or their story? Is this my ego or their ego? Is this their expectations and wants and needs, or is this my beliefs, expectations? So that's why you say it's nigh on impossible, but it's useful just to provide a space. And the place to look is probably back into, the old sort of, not the old, I mean, a lot of the religious institutions, in Catholic society, you have confession. It's that you go and, absolve your sins, if you like, you pour it all out there. And there's, there's different religions have sort of washing ceremonies, or they have cleansing ceremonies and things like that. It's allowance to get out, but actually it's in a forgiving, this is a sort of a neutral, harm-free environment that it's there for, sort of, confess your sins or otherwise. So we have that, but people.
Do you have that in the show? Do you have people confessing their sins?
I have had.
Yeah.
I've had sins that would put people in jail very quickly. So that it does. I mean, there's sometimes there can be morals that come up to play, and you kind of going, okay, what's my code of ethics here?
Mm-hmm.
And again, I mean, morals. There's another one. My morals. I'm applying what they've done to my standards, and that may contravene my religious beliefs, or that may contravene my my understanding, or otherwise. So what do you do?
Yeah, what do you do exactly?
The most beautiful.
Not to put you on the spot.
No, I mean,
yeah, what do you do then?
the most beautiful thing, and anyone, once you get into it, is, it's like someone says, "Who am I?" It's like, well, that is one of the deepest questions you can ever ask anyone. So the thing, as much as I can do, is saying is, I am, and they are. I am what I am, and that will change every time I hear something, do something, and all that. It's a constantly evolving thing, and they're doing what's right to them. We've said you walk a mile in someone else's shoes, and would you have done the same thing? Well, maybe, or, if I understood what they understood, would I feel the same way? Rather than sitting on the sidelines and going, well, I wouldn't have done that. It's like, well, yeah, that's the right answer for you, but it's not the right answer for them. You cannot apply your rules to their game. So as much as you can, I think you have to go, it's no judgment. It's their space. Again, you go back and say, this is pre-recorded, this is recorded, this is potentially going public. You're on an interview, for goodness sake. This is not a chat down the pub and nobody else is listening and it's your word against mine. There's a little record symbol in the top left-hand corner. So eventually you have to go, buyer beware, attendee beware, that actually confess if you like, but it's there. So, but that is also useful. I think it holds it in a beautiful space that allows it to be, it stops it from becoming a counseling session or, a slander session, when you're sort of dragging in other people. So by holding it away from that space and saying, Anybody negative in your life or anything negative you have to say, please don't use names. Anything positive, feel free to name drop. Because if we're bringing in the negative, that's an opinion applied on somebody else. It might be their involvement, their contribution or lack of, their beliefs, their expectations, what they did to you, what they didn't do to you, and it's like that's sometimes the only place that's going to decide that is a court of law, whether that was the right thing or the wrong thing.
If
And
even.
yeah, exactly. And as a lot of people will say, the law is an ass, and it doesn't mean that that's the right thing, but it is the law, and that's the set of rules of the country. So again, but that's even laws can be up to opinion in which way they're applied. So again, we come back to truth, and my truth may be different to your truth.
Mm-hmm.
And it is just that. It may not be the truth, but it's the truth that we know. But again, that your truth evolves every day. Every experience you have will taint your truth or make you a new truth, you know? So
So, okay. So it's not that it's totally without agenda, it's holding a blank space. How has that developed for you? So, what have you learned through the show?
it's developed in a number of ways. It's reinforced that actually the podcast is step one of, I think it's 13 steps. I've worked it out to be now. It's a conversation. It's a conversation starter. And it's not unusual that I will hear back within a 2-week period of people having had a realization, a shift, a change, just a lot of things, just an awareness suddenly that they hadn't had before.
After being on the show.
After being on the show. Now, whether or not that goes public or not, and like I say, I totally respect the guest and saying, generally I'll know. I mean, if at the end of the interview you kind of going, I don't see anything contentious here, but
Mm-hmm.
it will be held private, so you will get a link to watch it back in your own space. Please sleep on it. Don't watch it back straight away. Allow your put your brain to sleep and let your subconscious replay overnight. Listen to it tomorrow or listen to it the next day with fresh eyes. They're never fresh because they're always pre-tainted with previous experiences, but with a fresh perspective, let's say. So listen to there's something that happened, that recording, but listen to it with a fresh perspective, having been through, invented, and gone through the whole experience.
Mm-hmm.
That's the ideal thing. So let them to do that. So, and then let me know. And for ease, because humans are so busy and things like that, I generally say it will go public in 72 hours unless you tell me otherwise. But it will be, if you need more time, let me know. If you need something else, so many people don't like the sound of their own voice, so they won't listen to it. I'll say, well, give it to your mother, your brother, your dog, the next door neighbor, whoever can give you an unbiased view. Again, another fresh perspective. And then kind of going, I know what you mean, but that could be misinterpreted. And misinterpretation is down to opinion, is it down to agendas, it down to another things. But if somebody else has heard something you've said, which you think may not be contentious, but they've picked up as contentious, that could be the reflection on them or reflection on you or what it is. So unintentionally, there could be something in there. That's why I also say, listen, I cannot stand here and say this interview is good to go because that's my opinion. You may have said something about a member of your family or something else, which I haven't realized is potentially a contentious thing, when actually somebody else in your family going, you can't say that, or that's not correct, or whatever it is. So it is just that, people have told us what they want us to hear.
Mm-hmm.
That's also why I think the strength comes in the duration of the interviews, in that first half hour is conscious, the second half hour is mid-conscious, and then after that it is you're speaking as fast as you're thinking, and at that point you're in what I would call flow. So flow kicks in anywhere from 30 minutes to 60 minutes, and that's, like I say, it's just, and we're back to the people saying, I hadn't thought about that, or gosh, that's an interesting way of looking at it, or that's an interesting question. It's just a question, but they've chosen for it to be quite deep or meaningful, whatever. And because they're in flow and they're in that particular state already, well, suddenly then they'll unpack another few things while they're in that position. And suddenly they're telling you their deepest, most wonderful secrets. And that may or may not be sort of something that can be publicized. So,
and sometimes it can. Some of my favorite ones are when people do. It's not even revealing; they're just sharing. And yeah, so that can be my most.
Yeah, it's the power of silence. I mean, I keep coming back to that. It's just, it doesn't, I mean, the questions, yes, can be good, but I think it's just sitting back and letting somebody finish. We just generally don't do that. It's, it's like talking or conversing is like it's a sport. It's like, table tennis. You said something, so I'll say something and you'll say something. And then you throw in a bit of ego in there as well. And it's going, you said your dog was bigger than my dog. So my sort of response back is going to be that actually my dog's got a bigger tail than you, and you kind of, you're on a hiding to nothing because, you might say, well, this person makes me feel uneasy because I don't know, he's got this or she's got that or whatever, it brings in all the sort of lack ego, just all the values are suddenly fired up, because the person you're speaking to has done something to your value set.
So how does it make how do you feel whenever you're sitting listening to somebody and you have that blank piece of paper? How do you feel?
Honestly, it's almost like it's like being a translator. It's probably the best way of putting it. Someone that's translating for, I think, quite often when we think of translator, we think of like the UN, or
Well, you do.
well, I do,
now,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. There you go, so, a translator is there as you're there to facilitate. You're there to take the information that's coming at you, to put it through, and then to replicate it back out. No different to an artist who's looking at something, flushes it through their mind, and then puts it back out onto their representation of it.
Yeah.
So people may say, well, actually, I see, so you could have everything from a painting, which is a sort of a replica of, like a photograph, and saying, I see a mountain and 4 trees. You've painted a mountain, 4 trees. The next person may come along and put a blue blob and like pink, pink stripes. And you're kind of going, how, what's going on here? And it's going, but that's my interpretation of it.
Yeah.
So when you come back to the likes of an interpreter, that's the thing is, interpreter's not there to suddenly go, I actually know the guy really well. So I know he's just said that actually all cheese should be round. I know he actually means that all cheese should be round and it should be wrapped up in pink paper with a blue tie. You kind of going, hold on, you've just taken stuff that's been represented and presented to you, and you've distorted it. You've added to it, you've distorted it, you've changed it, you've deleted some stuff, and then you've pumped it back out again. That has gone through a decision tree and a opinion set, it's gone through all that. So that's not a like representation. So the best thing I can potentially do is provide the space that gives them the most. What's coming out of this really, I find, is being the best mirror holder I can be. So my job is not to necessarily comment on the reflection. The person can reflect that themselves. My job is simply to stand there and saying, tell me what you see. Because if you're standing beside holding a big, in my mind, it's like a big, gilded mirror and full height. And it's just to hold it steady so they can reflect. They can come in closer, they can go out further, that they can see what they can see, and I can say, well, actually, I notice as you look into the mirror that I can see that you feel uncomfortable. I'm feeling uncomfortable. Does that make any sense? Okay. And it's like when I see myself like this, or, so it's almost, in the construction world, it'd be called a client agent. It's somebody who's not necessarily, you're not in the decision tree, or you're not there, you're there almost as a bird's eye view, or you're there as a separate third party. You kind of going, I'm not responsible for this. I'm here merely to visually observe what's happening. And, saying, well, I've noticed this, or I see that this has come in with an intention, or this has come in with a certain energy, or this has come in with, this, I can see that you're getting worked up, or I can see that this is happening. Does that make sense? Does that sort of represent how you feel? Because I can't tell them saying, I've noticed you got really angry at that. You must be really angry. Are you angry at them? Okay, again, I've just suddenly run a whole story. I've distorted it there. And it might be going, I'm really angry because I really need to go to the loo right now. You're kind of going, okay, so that was absolutely nothing to do with what you're talking about. Yet I had run this whole story in my head about why they were getting upset. So that's the thing we can. And the mind moves so quickly. If you say to someone, it's like, right, well, what are you thinking about now? And then what, and suddenly
The
people
worst
go,
question. What are you
yeah.
thinking about?
It's like, well, I was just thinking about, the grass on the, outside.
Nothing.
I was like,
What
how did
time
you get to that? And it's like, well, when I was thinking of grass, I was thinking of the gardener, and then when I was thinking of the gardener, he reminds me of my mate Bob, and then Bob, that was when I was, and you follow this tenuous link, and everyone else is sitting there going, okay. It's like when someone tries to explain a dream to you, even they can't really piece it all together, and let alone the bystander, and going, it was really funny. I promise you, it was the funniest thing ever. And by the time they've sort of explained it, it's like, never mind being a flat joke. It's just kind of going, okay, I'm sure it was wonderful. I'm sure it was brilliant for you, but details.
You went muted there, just for a wee second.
So yeah.
Oh, I can hear you now. Yeah.
So yeah, it's explaining your dream to somebody else. It's impossible, because not only can you not say, well, do you remember that red car I used to have? Well, suddenly, in a dream, it's like, I'm driving the red car that my next door neighbor had when I was 3, and I was talking to, my great aunt Bessie, who looked like my primary school teacher, and then my sort of ex boyfriend's mother. And everyone, and somehow in your mind, in the wonderful world of the mind, you're kind of going, it made sense at the time, but you don't know half those people, and then you can't possibly, I can't possibly give you the feeling and the intensity and why that could even be connected, and even there's not enough words in the English language to explain what that meant and felt like. Then suddenly you're just sitting there going, okay, I'm pleased for you. So almost no different to an interview, and kind of going, how do you feel? At the end of the interview, I'm pretty sure I would have done it with yourself, and most people are saying, how do you feel?
Yeah.
Because they'll want to know, saying, well, how was that? And it's kind of going, it was good. I believed you. That's one of the key things. I'll generally know when someone's holding back, or when someone's said something that's not quite right. You feel it. You really feel it. And I don't mind, because that's the other thing is, I say to people, if you don't want to talk about it, don't talk about it. If,
Stop
let
there
me
for a
know.
second. Your microphone has went like funny. Talk again. It's went like deeper.
Is that any better?
Yes, that's you back now. So you really will get a sense whether you believe them or not.
Yeah. I mean, it's everything from body language to tone to energy. But again, for me to believe them means I have to have judged them.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But I think it's not.
But your agenda is not to judge them.
My agenda is not to judge them, but I think what, going a step further, what you're actually picking up on is a discomfort or a dis-ease in themselves. So they're not at ease at something. So they've said something, and then you've kind of gone, I'm not sure that you believe yourself, or I'm not sure that that's you meant what you just said. There's a disconnect between the emotion that they're having, or I'm feeling in terms of a sixth sense, and also then what they've just said. So when there's not, it's a bit like, I don't know, it's like the usual thing of going, I'm going to scowl here and I'm going to say, I'm really, really happy. you're kind of going, ooh, that's weird.
Yes.
It's like,
Yeah.
do you remember Heinz put out green tomato ketchup one year?
Yes.
How much of a head wreck was that?
And then, like in Ireland, they put out recently, the mayonnaise and the ketchup mix.
Together?
Yeah.
And it's just like, it just blows the head up.
I know. It's like, oh, look what they've done. Yeah.
And I was like, but so many things is kind of going, you can see the decision, you can see everything and going, what? Why?
Yeah. Why
I
did they
can
do
see it, but yet it tastes different. It's like someone saying, I'm really happy with a big, long, sad face. It's just kind of going, oh, hold on. There's just, so I'm being a little dramatic, but that's the point when somebody is not necessarily, their language is not matching their energy or their passion or something else.
But I suppose, okay, better watch there. I'm trying to pre-frame something.
Please go ahead.
Well, I am. I realised I was. I'm just thinking, though, sometimes, and I've certainly experienced, you can project things or have things projected onto you. So if, even in not believing, for whatever reason, how would you work? What would you do with that? How would you kind of get that process to uncover what the truth of it is?
I think if you're honest and you just honest in the point of going, I'm getting really mixed emotions
Or
here.
would you?
I think if you can say, I'm getting mixed emotions, or I don't quite understand. Can you unwrap that for me a bit?
Yeah.
So that's not hopefully not a judgment. It's just allowing them for them to potentially rephrase it. It might be that you've missed a key word, or you've just something is that, when someone explains it from a different angle, quite often they will give you a different set of details. It could be the same event, but actually they, in their mind, they've jumped out of the event and they've sort of run around the other side of the car, and they're suddenly going, it's happened for this angle. Does that work for you? And suddenly you kind of going, actually, yeah, no, that makes total sense now. I just had missed the little detail that, I didn't pick up the last time. So again, you've not sort of sat down and gone, I think you're a bit of a telling a few porcupines there, it's
that would go down really well, wouldn't it?
so.
And you're not even thinking that. I think it's just, I know I've had that experience, with you, talking on the show where you're like saying, what do you mean by that? And you're seeking that clarity. And it's a gift actually to be able to clarify what you mean, or as happened on my talk, to realize that actually you just said something and it really isn't true. Whenever I was talking about kind of how I try not to work people out anymore, and even as I said the words, I realized, oh my God, I totally do. I don't expect to, but I totally do try to do it. Oh, you've muted. No. Yep.
Back. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nigh on impossible. Quite often. So I think if you'd almost go past the language, and a couple of wee things that I've found useful for myself is actually look for the patterns. So if you can start looking at, are they, I know we've talked about it before, is saying, are they using visual language? Are they using auditory language? Are they using kinesthetic language? Are they using gustatory language? So if you can actually, and almost put them on notice quite early and saying, I'm not always necessarily looking for the words, or it's not necessarily about what you're saying. It could be about what you're not saying, or the words you're using, or the tone of the context. So that's actually probably something else as well, is putting them on notice in terms of going, you might be saying this, but I'm watching out for body language. So I'm not saying I'm not by any shape of the imagination like a human lie detector tester or whatever,
Yeah. Not one of your skills.
Yeah, no, it's kind of going. I noticed that you're right ear twitched when something happened. No, I'm not there yet. Um, but I think almost putting someone on notice in that, in terms of going, it's not, I'm looking far deeper than just, you said, I'm really hungry and I'd like pizza for tea, and you're kind of going, okay, I've spotting some language or tone or context in that, and suddenly kind of going, ooh, okay, this person's actually listening to me, and they've kind of suddenly they've got, like a lot of us is saying, we're all convinced that people don't necessarily haven't picked up, and going, well, I'm just going to put a big smile on my face and everything's going to be okay. And everyone's going, are you okay? I know you're smiling, but seriously, I'm kind of
I'm getting
not,
chills.
I'm not buying it, So,
Yeah,
there's only so many times you can put lipstick on the pig before everyone eventually goes, it is a pig,
yeah.
Um,
Just stop.
yeah.
Yeah,
So we're kind of not buying it, So, but I don't know, it's human nature or what. We kind of go, nobody else can see this, can they? And you're like going, actually, everyone can see it, and I really wish you would realize that, So, yeah.
So in mirroring that though, that must be so helpful. I keep putting words in mouth. I don't mean to, but I'm just thinking that it's almost a gift sometimes if you have someone in your life who's able to mirror that back. If you have someone who's able to say, without judging you or without having an expectation, but is able to say to you, I don't believe it happened to me this morning. I was talking about something that is really important to me, but I was slightly embarrassed within the context. I was like putting myself out there, and they were just like, I don't believe you. And it's the most freeing thing, because in that moment you have to go, damn it.
Yeah.
Um, so as a mirror holder, explain that a wee bit more.
That's, being a mirror holder, it's like only you will know what it means. Somebody else can try and tell you what, I feel anxious. So I'm going to have to ask you why you feel anxious. I can't just sort of go, yeah, I see why you're anxious. You're going, no, you don't. You don't know
Yeah.
how far that spreads back and what that's connected to something, and 16 random steps that nobody could ever make unless you were in my head. So being a mirror holder, you kind of go, on, can you unpack that? Can you, I'm noticing this. Does that make sense? I'm noticing you've suddenly gone quiet, or, you're beaming from ear to ear or something else. So all I'm trying to do is pick up on the cues and then sort of get them to unpack that a little bit further. And during that unpacking process, they've suddenly gone, oh my goodness, when, you've asked me just to dig a little bit deeper in this bit. And in the process of trying to explain that for me, which they're not, they explain it to themselves, but explain that to me has sort of, they've said the words out loud, which has allowed them to hear back in their own ears. So suddenly it's come out of their mind, through their vocal cords, out their mouth, back in their ears, and suddenly going, do you know, I've just heard myself. You'll hear people saying that.
You do.
I've just heard what I've just said. Oh my goodness.
Or it's that I've never said that before. I love it. I love it when people have that moment.
And yet we talk to ourselves morning, in and night, and yet we're blown away because, even in your own echo chamber, you kind of going, how do I know this is the right echo chamber? How do I know I've not lined it with lies, beliefs, and all the rest? Because that's the thing, when our truth is our truth. But you can't, anyone else outside would going, well, that's not the truth. I know that's not the truth. That's not normal behavior. But that's all you've ever known. So that is normal behavior to you. So applying, again, that's your set of rules, you comparing your echo chamber with their echo chamber, and you kind of go, no, mine is like, that doesn't happen. But who's saying yours is the right echo chamber? Because you've got your years of beliefs, expectations, and that's a good thing. And they're saying, well, you need to calibrate and saying, well, does that mean it's good or bad for you? So they've just said, I like cheese and onion crisps. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? If you've got, like me, you've got a very normal, a resting sort of neutral or unhappy face is just my natural expression.
I wondered what you were going to say.
I'm trying not to swear, but so people go, I'm kind of going, how do you feel? I feel fine, but people going, well, you look a bit sad, a bit miserable. And you're kind of going, that's just my natural features, but thank you.
Yeah.
You know, because again, it's even just how I'm looking at people, kind of going, I feel judged because you're staring at me. It's kind of going, I'm just trying to stay focused. That's all. It's not, you know. So even the
Feel
way
like you're
someone
under
looks
them.
at you, you feel, you know. So probably a very distinct reason why, you know, you see, you know, a counselor and a, you know, a therapist and a patient. Generally, the patient may be looking the other way, so they can't take a prejudgment from the face. You know, someone just reveals that they, I don't know, they like to dress up strangely at the weekends. Well, then you might unintentionally give off a micro expression, you know, of funniness or sadness or anger or whatever as the sort of as the mirror holder. So you kind of going, well, they're then going to feel slightly judged because they've suddenly smirked at me, or they've suddenly, you know, or else when someone has a realization, you know, it's very hard not to just sort of get into the echo chamber and start going, yes, yes, I know you felt that too.
Just at that moment, yeah.
And you're kind of going, well, that's, you know, that's only part of the message. And yet you've almost celebrated too soon. You know, you should have maybe let that unpack further. But again, is letting the person's, you know, say, how do you feel? It's like, I feel great. It's kind of going, good. I really feel that you feel great. That's brilliant. I'm pleased for you.
Yeah.
You know, so you're trying again not to say, I felt that too. I felt that you really sort of hit the nail on the head this week, or that this, you know, that really sort of was the perfect thing for you. And you kind of go on, how do you know? You might have just received half the message, or you've just unpacked stage 1 of 6. And yet mentally in my head, I'm going, oh yeah, I'm good. You know, and suddenly it's like solved, sorted. That person, yep, cured for life. And you're kind of going, actually, that was step 1, you
Yeah.
know, and you don't even realize because again, you've sort of inflicted your opinions upon it and your judgments upon it and your agenda upon it and kind of going, yep, I did this step, this step, this step. They said this. They felt great. They said this. Great. Done. Solved. Sorted. Yeah. And they come back next week or next time and they go, yeah, do you know, I felt good until later on that evening. And then something else happened, something else happened. And you're kind of going, hmm, I thought I cured them. I thought this has
No.
happened, you know,
Yeah.
but you can't,
Only.
you know. So all you can do is be the best mirror holder and keep sort of letting them see the reflection, keep helping them to understand it, and keep spotting the micro expressions, keep just being without agenda and like going, right, you know, really this is the point in, you know, at this time in the conversation, then I need to start suggesting solutions A, B, C, you know. So that's the talent of anyone who sort of is helping or is sitting as mirror holder for somebody else, is to just let them unpack at their speed,
Mhm.
you know.
So would you say your face is a benefit in this process?
Could
How do
be.
you manage your expressions? I'm a very expressive person, as you're well aware, and Zoom has shocked me because you don't realize quite how expressive you are until there's a global pandemic and you have to look at yourself all the time. um, so how do you manage your expressions? How do you keep that to try and keep it as neutral as possible?
It's no different if you take a translator.
Mm-hmm.
I think if somebody is listening intently,
Mm-hmm.
and, you know, no different if you're trying to multitask, um, you know, and you're trying to listen to someone. So I don't know, and I'm not a translator, but, you know, if somebody was trying to listen in one language, you know, and Heather's talking away, and then I need to actually take that in, I need to sort of find the matching word or whatever, and then I need to transcribe it into a second language or something else. Well, I would say look at their expression, and that's going to be, you know, the closest thing to their focus concentrated, you know, which is generally likely to be a slightly sort of non-expression, as much because you're so busy inside your own head that actually you don't have time to go, oh, I'm not looking very pretty as I translate, or I'm not smiling, and you can, you know, it's just, you know, um as much as you can do. But interestingly, you can really tell when someone's, you know, when someone's smiling when they talk, you know, you can hear because it changes the tone of context or that. So I imagine just your natural, yes, you can change your frame and change your shape so you can influence the conversation. You know, it's like you sound different when you stand up and sit down. Um, but yeah, so how do I keep a straight face or keep a normal face? I think if you're busy trying to genuinely understand without judgment, and you are constantly having to do that and saying, how do I make sure I'm not putting my judgment on it? by asking blank questions, by asking neutral questions. What does that mean? They're suddenly going, and then I won the lottery. Okay, what does that mean? Was that good? Was it bad? How did you feel about that? And they might, so I felt awful because suddenly I had all this money, and you know what I mean? Whereas anyone's prejudgment would have jumped in and said, that'd be fantastic. When actually someone says, nope, that just triggered the addict in me, which then meant I went down and I started to, sort of drink petrol. And you're kind of going, so that was the beginning of the end for you, actually. Okay, that's very different. Well, in my mind, I had gone off and bought myself a mental yacht, and I'd done this, and this because you said you'd won the lottery. So it's kind of going, whoa, okay, I need to just keep my pony in place.
Keep it steady.
Yeah.
Have you ever interviewed somebody who's won the lottery?
No, I haven't actually. Not yet.
Good, wouldn't it?
I think anyone.
Oh, you've disappeared. Your sound has went off again.
Is that better now?
Yep.
I think anyone that's had a traumatic or significant change, which probably is everyone in their life, because we all have significant steps or significant things that have happened. I think that's we all have had that, and it's probably the question is, how have you reacted? And that, because when you run it through your set of beliefs and expectations, will reflect on what's happening inside. A lottery win to somebody could be the making of them. A lottery win to somebody else could be the destruction of them. A lottery win for someone else could be that it's against their religion. So I mean, there's 50 things, and you kind of go on, marketing, social media, everything else would say, my gosh, you won the lottery, and you just don't know how that's going to impact. And then also you might feel good today, but you feel terrible tomorrow because you've worked all your life to earn money, and then suddenly someone just hands it to you. So suddenly all your values are completely shot. I did interview somebody who had been on, what's the best way of putting it? One of these, sort of online, it's a Britain's Got Talent, basically. So, what would you call it? Talent contest, if you like, but it was a significant. So they suddenly went from being little Mr. Somebody from somewhere to doing very well on that particular show, to basically fast forwarding, unpacking the next couple of months, and basically everything that had been sort of promised and it had all sort of happened, basically unwound because things didn't happen quite the way they wanted, and the momentum is lost after the occasion, things like that. So, but they've basically found themselves dropped back into the same position, literally sitting back on the same couch that they were pre the event, this sort of massive thing. And to say they almost had shell shock / PTSD is an understatement, because it's almost like kind of going, what just happened?
Yeah.
Because it was outside of their beliefs, outside their wildest expectations, promises, things, exposure, ideas, suggestion, all this. And then suddenly it's all just got a bit fuzzy and hasn't quite worked out and hasn't had time to settle in. And then suddenly, boosh, they're back in the same environment they were in before, but with kind of having seen and experienced things that they can't even get their head around. No different to, say, a lottery win, and suddenly kind of going, what do I do with all this? So when you think of it that way, is there any reason why, or any sort of surprise that people who win the lottery quite often, that the lottery win is, the money is typically gone within a relatively short period of time?
Quite a short space of time. Like statistically, like they have studied it. They do keep a record.
Yeah. So interesting.
You'd said earlier on about so I've been doing my thick man drawings now. You've got me doing it. You were saying that you developed 13 steps. I don't know if you want to get into that, but you were saying there you developed 13 steps, and the podcast is almost a step one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I won't get fully into it, but just to sort of unwrap it a little bit. So the podcast is actually probably step 3. So step 1 being sort of the initial connection, so that you're conversing. So that's a little bit of, are they willing to come on the show? What's the background? So a little bit, and not that I sort of want to delve too much into somebody's background, because that's the the beauty of the show is quite often it's unmeditated, it's not premeditated, whatever the right wording is, but
Premeditated, yeah.
yeah. So it's fresh,
Mm-hmm.
it's fresh surprise, fresh shock. It's as much as possible without judgment. Whereas if I've pre-read their story or heard another interview, it's very hard for me not to either sort of go, well, they asked that, so I don't want to ask that, or they asked this, and actually I thought that, so I'd really love to push them down that. So straight away I'm judging, opinionating with an agenda.
Yeah.
So the less I know, the better, and they can unpack it at their speed and things like that. It also does depend where they're at in their life, because sometimes someone will unpack it and they'll put a different significance on it today than they did tomorrow because actually they're hungry or they've had a bad day. So you can get sort of short-term fluctuations in their opinion because of environmental factors that are going on around them. But yeah, so podcast is generally step one. People then find that actually that's triggered as many questions as they've answered. In fact, it's probably triggered a lot more. We've unpacked a few things they haven't seen before, so suddenly it then triggers a journey. Well, when it triggers one journey and they've had this cathartic sort of release, we'll then actually quite often saying, well, let's follow it up with a second interview. So that second interview may be about their passion, their mission, their vision, their expertise, because suddenly we've discovered that they have something they feel really passionate about. So that then becomes almost a detailed talk. Now we're recording all this, we're transcribing all this, so suddenly we have content where they're pulling through. The more specific you get about your goal, then the more people want to talk about it because it is a passion, it gives off energy. And then whenever we give off energy, it's a very positive experience. So we want to repeat that. So we'll talk about it again. So suddenly we're doing information series. Suddenly we want to, sort of pass on our gift and our passion to the world. So we will, go into the next step. Well, now you have a lot of content, so which is great. And you can suddenly then start to look at doing like an ebook. And then when you start looking at the ebook, you kind of go, well, if I did this a couple more times, then I could release even more energy, more content, more ideas, which then would allow me to do a book. In fact, if I'm doing a book, I might as well do a radio show around that as well. And if I'm doing a radio show, then I may as well do a lecture series. And if I'm doing a lecture series, I may as well do up a whole academy and have a whole institution around the concepts of all this. So why is the podcast like, step 3 essentially is simply because they are, getting through the release process. Suddenly they're getting through unpacking that idea, through having the space to actually, hear themselves talk, really sort of put out the idea, listen back to their own idea, see if that, no different to when we light a candle or something else, we suddenly see, is that, can we go away from that idea and come back? And is the candle going to be still lit? Do I still feel the passion, energy around that? It's like, yes, in fact, I actually feel more because, I felt more. How often sometimes do we have a conversation? Go, it's been really great talking to you. I must get talking to you again soon. And you genuinely mean it. The next day, you're kind of going, whatever. I don't actually, the energy has just fizzled. It's fine. And that's neither good nor bad. It just hasn't taken any more momentum. It's ran its course, no different to, when does, a boulder coming down a hill become an avalanche, or when does it just sort of fizzle out and stop? Neither is right, neither is wrong. It runs its course.
Yeah.
Having no agenda means it can either, you just observe the idea and suddenly you kind of go and, that sort of small rock that started tumbling down the hill suddenly has hit another rock, another idea, another idea, another idea. And next thing you know, there's a whole landslide all the way down, and momentum, energy, and things have all been brought into place. When actually the next would just be, it's an interesting idea and it fizzled out. And that's okay. It's just not for me.
Okay. And the result of this for people, if you can just take me through that again, you did touch on it.
Of having no agenda?
Yes, for the guests.
It's cathartic is probably the best, most used word. Cathartism being the opportunity to reflect, which funnily enough is where a master mirror holder will say. So it allowed me to reflect back on my journey, actually what I really want to do. I've suddenly got clarity. I understand now. I have a different perspective. have a different outlook. Yeah, that's because I've not tainted it. I've not, well, I've certainly tried not to. I've not thrown in ideas, you know, I don't know, it's like someone trying to make a pie and me throwing in random ingredients in the middle of it. You kind of go, this doesn't make any sense. You know, I've made this pie and suddenly there's a spanner in the middle of it. Well, that was my opinion or idea. I'd thrown in just for good measure. You know, so I'm not even trying to impress necessarily that saying, well, you know, I came up with this idea, wasn't that good? You know, whereas in saying, well, okay, give me a bit more detail. How's this pie going to look? What depth is it? So if I can push them onto a different dimension, saying, because if someone especially is looking at something and saying, well, I see, you know, a tabletop, it's kind of going, not quite getting it. Can you explain it a different way? Well, suddenly they'll describe it from a different position. Well, suddenly that gives them depth in the picture. And saying, well, it's a tabletop and it's on 14 legs. It's like, oh, okay, this is different. Okay, explain a bit further for me. So it's on 14 legs, and actually, but the table is the size of a football pitch. Oh, okay, do you know what I mean? So suddenly it's, you've asked them to explain that, but by asking them to change perspective has suddenly given them clarity, and suddenly it's kind of going, wow, this is definitely not what I was thinking. But you've given the opportunity rather than just going, so you see a tabletop, yeah, okay, so what are we putting on the tabletop? You know, because, and you can very quickly go down the path and suddenly you realize that actually, what are you talking about? It's like going, well, I'm actually talking about, you know, a tabletop tennis. That's what I'm thinking. And you're thinking something completely different.
Yeah.
So even saying that, can you give me a different perspective or can you explain that in a different way? It's a very clever tool that I've seen people use. You know, can you just not quite getting that? Can you, you know, can you present it in a different way for me, or can you break that down for me, or can you do that? And again, as humans, we are generally very obliging. You're saying, I don't really understand. And it's quite flattering to the ego saying, I don't really understand. How could you explain that to me? You know, I'm being subservient essentially and saying, you know, I appreciate your opinion. So please, can you tell me? So again, that goes to the unfolding process as well, you know, so. Cool.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to cover. There's no questions coming up for me.
Oh, perfect.
Any closing thoughts for you?
I think that there's a lot there, a lot more than I expected. And I think it's, you know, I think if you can take that on board and just try and be neutral for people and hold the space, just let people unfold their masterpiece, their vision. You know, be somebody else's mirror holder. Let them reflect on themselves and see themselves, and that's probably one of the nicest things you can do for somebody.
That's lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.